Hey everybody, Graham McBain, Remote CryptoCon. We've got Brandon Quittem here. Brandon, how's it going?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Graham. Excited to be here.
Hey, no problem. We appreciate having the Bitcoin perspective at the event, and you advise a lot of companies, so excited to hear what your thoughts are. Just to give people a background on you and how did you first get into Bitcoin? Tell us about that.
Yeah, definitely. So I'll try to keep it short here. I first heard about Bitcoin around the Silk Road days. I was in enterprise software at Oracle, and I just heard, a friend of a friend of a friend buying drugs on the internet. How is this possible? And I didn't really think much of Bitcoin as an investment at that point, but bumped into it, asked a few questions, dismissed it. Then I bumped into it again in 2014 at a meetup in Bali. Made sense there. I was a little bit more interested, but again, it was not the right time. And then, like most people, number was going up in 2017. So the price was going up. Friends were bugging me to buy Bitcoin, and then I started looking into it. And yeah, the greed brought me in initially, and then all of a sudden, there's so much more to this. It's actually a political move. It's in a way a revolution. It aligns with a lot of my values. And so at that point, I realized this is what I want to spend the next chunk of my life working on, and fell deep down the rabbit hole. About 3 to 6 months of intensive self-study, where the girlfriend at the time, now wife, was concerned about the amount of time I was studying and neglecting other things. And then I started doing some writing and thinking and working in the space. And, I owned an online business, still own the same online business, but I hired a small team to run that so I can focus exclusively on Bitcoin stuff.
That's very cool. That's very cool. So you've been around for a little while. Looking forward, right? You've done a lot of research. What kind of companies do you think need to be built over the next 5 years on Bitcoin?
Yeah, good question. And I think what most people want to hear is some super advanced, crazy technology that this stuff enables. But I actually think that we're still in need of basic infrastructure. And I would say in the last 12 months or so, the ability to acquire Bitcoin in the United States has gotten a lot better. With companies, disclosure, I work for Swan, but companies like Swan and Cash App and River and Lolly and Fold, these type of companies, where they focus exclusively on Bitcoin, which is both ideologically aligned with my perspective of the future and also a smart business move because it decreases engineering costs. And so I think we need more easy access to buy. In the US, it's getting better. I'm not worried about the US, but around the world, it's very hard just to simply trade your local fiat for some Bitcoin. Many countries struggle with that, and it's still shocking. And so I would say we still need the basic stuff, and we also need a massive improvement on education. And it's not an easy thing to understand. It requires sort of systematically unlearning all the things that you were fed through your traditional schooling. Um, Things like what is money? And thankfully, the countries that need it most are the countries who understand it the easiest. Those are countries like Greece, Cyprus, Venezuela, Argentina, etc. These are countries that have had issues with their sovereign currency. And so if you are a middle-aged person, you've seen 1 to 2 currency failures in a lot of these countries. So imagine being a kid watching your parents lose their life savings overnight because the local government mismanaged their sovereign currency. And so thankfully, those countries are more receptive to the message. You don't have to tell them why Bitcoin. You have to tell them, okay, how do I get some?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really interesting point. Simple is better. We talked about this a long time ago, but it's just single purpose ideas are typically the best, right? Like In-N-Out's got the best burgers because all they make is burgers. So I think that's a really good point. Um, cool. Well, yeah. So you've been in this space for a little while. You've researched it for a little while. How do you think your preconceptions have changed since you first got in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And it's important to realize that although now I believe that Bitcoin is not only the most important aspect here, but I also think it will capture the majority of the value. But it didn't always start that way. I heard of Bitcoin first, right? It has the best brand recognition, so it's easy to bump into Bitcoin first. But I did quickly find Ethereum afterwards, and I was lured into the idea of a blockchain that can inherently do all the things that Bitcoin was described at doing. Things like being a trustless communication layer, or decentralizing power. All these are very seductive narratives. And I think that I was attracted to them. You know, I was way down that rabbit hole of supply chain, blockchains, and app tokens for everything, tokenize the world. All those kind of narratives were appealing. However, how I get with topics is I become quite obsessive, and my wife would say that's an understatement. And so I was going deeper and deeper and deeper, trying to figure out where the real value is in these systems. And unfortunately, I was finding that a blockchain doesn't actually do all the things that we hope it does inherently. And so the things like decentralization or immutability or censorship resistance or any of the bouquet of benefits that the Bitcoin system has, that doesn't come simply because it has a blockchain data structure. It comes from an incentive of surrounding technologies that all are bolted on together, similar to Frankenstein. This is things like proof of work and a blockchain and cryptography and peer-to-peer network, et cetera, et cetera. So you add all those things together, and that's how you get the ability to have a fixed supply and a credible monetary policy, and it offers censorship resistance and immutability. And so what we found is that people tried to take a piece out of Bitcoin. Let's take the blockchain out, and then let's apply some pretty math in a pretty white paper, and then hope it does what Bitcoin does. And unfortunately, that's just not the case. And so where I sit now is my mental space goes to at least 90 to 95% in Bitcoin, but I also keep an eye on the Ethereum space. I keep an eye on Decred. I keep an eye on, that's pretty much it. And so where I'm at today is Bitcoin is the most important thing. It also has the best chance of succeeding. And I think that it's most important that I spend my time there. It doesn't mean that other things aren't interesting. There's plenty of interesting things coming out of Ethereum. But in my mind, money is sort of a root layer, a base layer operating system for humanity. And most people don't really think about money like that, although all of human society is coordinated by the mechanism of money, of the tool of money. It can be thought of like a language. And if what we're seeing now is everyone around the world wants to learn English. And that's not because English is better or English speaking countries are better. It's because the most people in the world speak English, and it's an advantage to join that network. And so money is the same way. Bitcoin has the largest network effect. It's growing the fastest. It has the ability to win. And if it does win, or if it does, increase in size to the point where it's economically relevant for some percentage of people, then I think our society as a whole will benefit. It's sort of an antidote to the wild, wild west cavalier management of fiat money that has dominated the last about 100 years. And so I'm optimistic that Bitcoin can push back on a ever expanding state, a state that does not necessarily keep an eye on the populace. It more wants to maintain its control over a system. I'm not saying it's a grand conspiracy, just that's how the incentives are playing out. And so I don't think our governments are any better than their incentives, just like I don't think individuals are any better than their incentives. Tying that all back, yeah, I'm now focused exclusively on Bitcoin, and yeah, I'm happy that's where I am. It wasn't for any ideological reasons. It was through rigorous study.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's funny to liken Bitcoin to a language like English, right? So like, and then Bitcoin Cash is like the Scottish accent, right? It's technically English, but also mostly illegible and not as popular. But
I would
I
say
say
that's
this as
charitable.
I'm ethnically Scottish, so I'm allowed to make that joke. So actually, this is a quick sidebar. A project I found interesting, and I ask basically every Bitcoin person I know about this, which is Handshake, the Handshake protocol. It's proof of work. It's a very specific thing. It's DNS. You know what I mean? Like our domain names. If we're moving to an online culture, domain names are incredibly important from a censorship resistance standpoint. I know there was name coins and stuff in the Bitcoin network that gives a lot of Bitcoiners a bad taste. Just interested in what you think about that project.
Yeah, so to preface, I do not understand handshakes, nuts and bolts well enough to really comment on that. But
Okay.
what my assessment is that if we could decentralize DNS, that would be a really good thing for the internet. right?
Cool.
Just generally speaking, I think that's true. However, I did go down this rabbit hole a little bit, maybe 2 years ago or 3 years ago. And what I found was actually that the problem didn't seem to be so bad. And what I mean by that is that the DNS registrars, they weren't abusing their power very much. And
Yeah.
so I would say that if we could do it, that would be really nice to have. And eventually I could see DNS services being co-opted or something like that. And so I don't view it in terms of magnitude of a problem. I see it to be 1/1,000,000th or 1/1000th, something like that compared to Bitcoin. However, I hope that they pull it off. I think it would be a useful thing, and it's a defensive strategy for a free and open internet, which I think underpins a free and open society.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's absolutely fair, and I think your measurements are probably pretty right on there. There was a one. I think of it actually more of like a rent seeker problem than an abusive power problem. In that there was a recent deal where the .org TLD was sold to a private equity firm that whose founder was the previous head of ICANN, and it was a seen as like a sweetheart deal kind of thing. And so though that's not an abuse of power, it is certainly a you know uh, rent seeking sort of insider deal, which is something we want to avoid. But to the point of
Definitely.
magnitude, I think you're right on. Um, so what you said you did some writing. You've got I mentioned your sort of relatively famous mycelium Bitcoin article. What prompted you to write that? Is it something that just sort of struck you as being a good analogy, or and tell me a little bit about that as you sort of got through the process of writing that article.
Yeah, definitely. And so I have a background of being interested in the natural world. I grew up camping and gardening and just really liked that stuff. I also played video games and sports. I wasn't just like a hippie in the woods, but I always had an affinity for it. Then as an adult, I rediscovered foraging mushrooms, which sort of led me down the path of learning about the fungi kingdom, learning from people like Paul Stamets, and the long list goes on. And so I found that the fungi kingdom was particularly fascinating. And in the fungi kingdom, the predominant structure that these organisms take is a mycelial structure, which you can think of like an underground root system. And it actually looks just like our modern internet. It is a network, and there's no center of control. It's decentralized. It communicates bidirectionally. It transports resources. It actually learns. It connects trees together to broker resources. And so that sort of just blew my mind. There's an underground internet, a wood wide web that connects all the organisms. And so, I learned that. Okay, that's mind blowing. Then I stumbled down in the Bitcoin rabbit hole, and I'm learning a little bit more, a little bit more. And then I realized, whoa, Bitcoin's peer-to-peer layer and the way the social layer, we're all individual nodes in this network contributing and acting in our own best interest. And together we make up the system. And that maps very well to this mycelial archetype. I had that epiphany in Bali in 2018 at a Bitcoin meetup. I went home, pulled out the journal, was just scribbling for hours, and I more or less got the main idea out that night. And then I sat on it for a few months, like honestly a little bit intimidated to put those ideas out there. Although I've been writing online for 6 years with relative success, this was a weird idea. And at that point, I didn't see a lot of content saying, well, did you know that Bitcoin's a mushroom? And, the context there is kind of crazy.
Because imagine the answer's got to be like, sure it is, buddy. Maybe you're
Yeah,
on
yeah.
mushroom. Yeah, yeah, no, totally can see the trepidation around that. Yeah, yeah.
But then I luckily stumbled into Dan Held's article series called Planting Bitcoin, which is a fantastic 4-part series, essentially using the analogy of planting a seed in a garden and tending the garden, that type of analogy, to the beginning of Bitcoin and how Satoshi had to cultivate the right conditions before he planted his garden. And the message had to be right and all those type of things. And I resonated with that analogy, and so did tons of other people. So I reached out to Dan and said, hey, I got this crazy idea. And thankfully, he was receptive to an absolute nobody on Twitter. And he helped me through that process. And can't thank him enough for getting those ideas out there. And so that's how it originally got out. Now, I think there was another part to your question.
Oh, it was sort of how did you originally get the idea, and then like what did you discover through the process of writing it? But I think you sort of covered it, but feel free to elaborate. Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any other heavy hitters. Well, I have to say I'm not the first person to analogize mycelium to the internet, or
Yeah.
even Bitcoin to a living organism. I think it was Terence McKenna who originally noticed that the mycelial archetype, that network archetype, persists throughout nature, and it also maps directly to the internet. And Ralph Merkle, a famous cryptographer, he mentioned that Bitcoin is the first digital living organism. You know, it lives and breathes on the internet. It pays people to do its bidding. And funny enough, I actually discovered that quote after I wrote the article, but you know, I might have run into it at some point. And honestly, I don't know sometimes if my ideas are my own or when I heard about them. And so it's sort of like I'm the summation of everything I've read and done and conversations I've had, and the summation of things that I haven't gone to, right? Things that didn't come into my context, which is kind of a funny thought.
Yeah. Yeah. It's my favorite conspiracy theory is that Satoshi is in fact what do you call it? Like a sentient AI that came to life and created this thing so that we would create computers for it to live. That's my favorite by far.
Fantastic.
Um, so back to surface as opposed to below surface. You've met a lot of entrepreneurs in this space, I'm sure. And this conference, is all about getting people to create businesses on public blockchains. What do you think are some common traps that first time Bitcoin entrepreneurs fall into, or sort of product traps that you think they fall into, and what they need to create?
Yeah, definitely. I think the first thing that came to mind right when you said that is, I'm drawing mostly on 2017, 2018. And in that context, everyone wanted to create their own token, their own project. And I'm hoping that the market is smart enough to realize that that's not a good idea, and instead build on one of the few public blockchains we have today that already have a massive lead. And I would say Bitcoin is the right approach personally. However, many people do believe that Ethereum is also important to build on. And so I would choose between those two platforms, and I would look at, are you going to build something that is going to be around for a long time? Are these things that will meld or merge into a public protocol and become a layer that's stuck there, that things people build around so it can't be obsolete, sort of form symbiosis with these public blockchains? And it's my belief that anything that's any of the private chain, enterprise, government chain, whatever, those are just not the same thing. They at best will decrease back office costs for enterprises by 5 or 10%. Is that interesting to me? Absolutely not. Is it interesting to some boring Oracle, Microsoft, SAP execs? Maybe. But I don't care about it, and it's not going to change the world. And so first things first is understand what these things are. People hastily come out with this idea and then they try to market it. They spend 2 years building this business. And then at the end of the day, they never understood what they were working with to begin with. And so how they fit into the ecosystem was just never going to work. And I want to impress on the idea that our time is the most valuable thing, and don't waste your time on some stupid idea. And so that's that. If I was to give some more concrete examples, um, I would think about still doing the basic stuff, and I would just try to make it easy to buy, easy to store, and easy to sell. Like, don't do anything crazy. We don't really have Bitcoin banks in its full context yet. We're sort of modularizing out lending and custody, et cetera. And so there's a lot of things that need to be built. I would say, yeah, start with the basics. And I would say, make sure you are kind to your community. Your reputation matters more than anywhere else. The whole ecosystem, if you're new to this space, everyone supports the idea of building in the open and making sure that you are ethically sound in everything that you do. And I think, Graham, you've done a good job with this. I know we spoke maybe a year ago now about what you wanted to do in the space. And since then, I've seen you do so many cool things publicly. And I think that is the way to build your reputation. So treat your customers with respect, obviously, but even more so, manage your space.
Cool. Well, thank you. That's very kind. Um, so where am I? Next one. Yeah. So moving on from that, what are some of the exciting companies? Or what are the most exciting companies you see right now I know you mentioned like Lolly and Fold. I think those are really neat companies. But anything that stands out to you, people that you think are really innovating right now, people should know about.
Yeah, I don't think I have any, novel answers here. I would just riff on the majority of the Bitcoin companies that um, most people speak about. Um, these are like, for example, there's the Lolly and the Folds of the world. Those are ways to easily earn Bitcoin. I think those are a nice sneaky backdoor into getting anyone who shops online should get a Lolly account, and you just get free Bitcoin when you shop online at the certain stores. That's a no-brainer. And I think they're doing a good job there. They seem to be growing, getting more investment and hiring. So I think those are good signs. That's a sneaky way in. Fold is a similar way like that, where they're going to be creating financial services like a Fold card. Every time you swipe, you get Bitcoin back, that type of thing. And so I think those are a really important category. Then you've got like the Unchained, River, and Casas. And these are a bit more like custody solutions with financial services down the road. And I think those are important. Those are sort of the beginning of Bitcoin banks. I really like the guys at Unchained. I think they're going in the right direction. And then the next category would be ways to acquire Bitcoin easily. And the clear leader here is Cash App, obviously a Square company. I'm blanking on the number now, but I think it was 300 million in Bitcoin sales in Q1 of this year. I
Yeah,
imagine they're going to shatter that once we get the Q2 numbers. They just have a hockey stick chart of selling Bitcoin. And I think that's a really, really important company. Cash App is notoriously used by people of a lower socioeconomic class who don't have access to financial services. Many people use Cash App, get their direct deposit bank account there. That is their bank, that is their digital finance. So that's really important. I really hope that the crowd that typically doesn't invest, I hope that savings becomes sexy, and we allow the lower socioeconomic class to front run the banks with Bitcoin and start stacking some sats. That would make me very happy. And the next company I must also bring up is Swan Bitcoin, which is a newer company that I also work for. I'm an advisor, and I do some work on their email marketing. But what Swan is an automatic Bitcoin purchasing plan product. And so you go to swanbitcoin.com and you fill out your account there, and you essentially say, I want to buy, let's say, $50 for the Bitcoin every week, or $100 a month, or whatever you want and whatever time cadence you want. You set it up, you connect your bank account, and that's it. Set it and forget it. We do the buys for you, and then you can automatically withdraw to your own wallet if you choose, or you can keep it with our licensed insured custodian in the US. And so what we sort of underpin this business on is the fact that dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin is the right approach. And what that means is a fixed buy every week, every month, an amount of dollars that you're okay losing. This isn't going to, stress you out, and you just set it and forget it. And if you look at the math, there's only, I'm paraphrasing here, but there's very few. If you dollar cost average for 3 years or 4 years straight, it's almost impossible to be down on your investment. And so this does two things. Number one, it removes your emotional reaction to the market, which is the hardest thing for anyone investing. And it also just doesn't make you spend any time, right? It's set it and forget it. You can just be zen about it. And so I think the company is very important. We're seeing massive growth in a very short amount of time. The team is strong. We're shipping products, and it's just a basic, simple thing that people need. And
yeah,
our long-term goal is to double down on education. We just want to be the easy on-ramp where you can tell your friends, hey, they're going to treat you right, and we will do the education for you. So Bitcoiners around the world can outsource education to their friends, which is a heavy burden. I've done it many times. You can try to outsource that to us. And so think of things like Swan University or Netflix for Bitcoin. That type of model will be our long-term strategy.
cool. Well, I've given this idea to the eToro people, but you can steal it as well, which would be drunk monetary history. So do like the drunk history show, but do it about monetary history. I think people would like that.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, it's got to be funny. If you get the right actors, it would be great. Um, so, you talked a little bit about Bitcoin banks. And I think, how Finney publicized this idea. Uh, do you think there is a need for Bitcoin backed central banks in the realm of MakerDAO. Like I saw a product the other day that did this. They issued a dollar on Bitcoin. Do you think that's needed? Do you think we're headed that direction? What do you think about that concept?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two things tangled up here. One, like what is the role of stable coins in the future with fiat? So we have the people's money, you have the government money, you have corporate money, and then stable coins can kind of like be in any of those buckets. And the goal of a stable coin is to maintain a stable purchasing power, or sorry, a stable price, being like it's worth $1, 1 euro, whatever. I think that I don't find that particularly useful in my day-to-day life because dollars. However, there are many places around the world where they don't have financial services and they don't have a stable currency. And so in those environments, I think something like a stable coin could be very useful. I still am concerned about stable coins holding their value because what are they pegged to? What are they stable to? If the US dollar, let's say, hyperinflates, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon, but eventually it probably will, then okay, your stable coin still says it's worth one Fed dollar, one US dollar, but maybe the purchasing power of a dollar continues to go down. And so I don't see that as a long-term solution to our monetary needs, but I think it's a really important thing for developing countries. And right now, while Bitcoin is inherently volatile, I think having a stable to a dollar makes sense in some cases. And so I think that, yeah, it's interesting. They're growing very fast right now. I think the MakerDAO system is very interesting. It's an attempt to make a algorithmic central bank rather than a person-run stable bank. I think that's a noble goal. And then the other question is Bitcoin banks. Like, what is a future where Bitcoin becomes, let's say Bitcoin becomes much larger than it is today, 100 times larger than it is today. And the need for banks that operate on Bitcoin will obviously be there because not everyone wants to manage their own finances. People always want to lend and borrow. And so these services must exist somewhere. And the Ethereum community would say, we want to build commercial banking services wholly based on algorithms, as little human interaction as possible. And that's a noble pursuit. It's you can see the rumblings there. I'm not sure if that can be pulled off or if it will be, but they're going to try their damnedest to find out. The Bitcoin community would say, good luck if it works. Bitcoin will probably migrate to some of those services. But the approach with Bitcoin would be more of, and this is not necessarily consensus in Bitcoin community, this is my opinion. I think a free banking model on Bitcoin is a better future, which is that banks can have any type of structure that they want. They can have a capital reserve requirements of 1%, or it can be fully reserved at 100%. And individuals can then choose the commercial bank that suits their needs. There will be people who want to put money in BlockFi and get an interest rate. There will be people who want to have no interest rate, but know that it's fully reserved. And I think that a market of banks who are competing, and they don't all roll up to the US Fed. Instead, they are sovereign individuals in their own right with their own Bitcoin balances. I think that that's a totally fine solution. I don't think that we need to be totally robo banks in order to benefit from a Bitcoin system, because what's most important is the sanctity of the money supply and the fact that that cannot be altered. Yeah, that's my thoughts.
Makes sense. It adds choice. Basically, sounds like choice is your answer of choice. Well, this has been a really fun conversation, and I'm glad you decided to join us. You're going to be doing a Q&A as well, so hopefully people bring a lot of good questions to that. Before sort of we go, I just want to know, where can people find you? What's the best way to connect with you?
Yeah, definitely. I think the easiest way to connect is on Twitter. My handle is bquittem, BQUITTEM. Or you can come on my website, brandonquittem.com. I also have articles on Medium and a few other places, like the Swan blog. And if you want to get started on Swan, you can go to swanbitcoin.com/Quittem. And if you do sign up, you'll get $10 worth of free Bitcoin.
Sweet. That's awesome. Well, Brandon, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being part of the event, and looking forward to seeing people ask you great questions later today.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Graham.
See ya.